Welcome back viewers, ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries and anyone with ears or other sound detection organs. Hope you enjoy. We are continuing with Going Native, written by Uncle Sealing. Going Native, Chapter 40. Forum should not exist. Ian was sure of it. Samuel had woken him up before the crack of dawn so they could get started on the long drive to Denver. The two commandos met them at the little bus with the Painter Observatory, Planetarium, and Science Center logo on the side, and the four climbed in and started without any more than a nod. Two things quickly became obvious to Ian. The first was that the plasticky seats and rough suspension meant he was not going to be catching up on his sleep. The second was that Samuel had absolutely awful taste in music. It was loud, screechy, and the human could not keep a tune to save his life as he sang along. The commandos both looked as bothered by it as Ian was, but they weren't going to tell the cute guy that his singing was lousy, so it fell to the only other male to break the news. "Sam, can you please turn it down? The music and your singing is a bit distracting." "Sorry," the human replied sheepishly before taking a swig of coffee from a thermos. "Singing helps keep me awake. It's a long and boring drive. I bet I could keep you awake." The commando grinned lecherously as she met eyes with Samuel through the rear-view mirror. Ian could see Samuel clench up, the fear in his eyes. "I think perhaps hitting on your boss's husband might not be the best idea, long term. You know how humans are." Ian hoped he could deflect them away from Sam. He didn't want his friend to suffer, and he definitely didn't want him to crash the bus on the winding mountain roads. His comment at least shut them up. "What about you, then?" the other commando asked. Ian could handle this. A little flirting would protect Sam. "You two couldn't handle me." "Oh really?" The commando unzipped her vest a little, showing off her generous cleavage. "Compared to Lieutenant Marion, I think you might be surprised." Samuel came to the rescue. "Another tip, insulting a man's wife is not a good way to get into his pants." That shut them both up, and Ian was able to get some actual work done on his pad. The amount of money coming into the facility was impressive. House Chelsea had been selling futures based on Sammy's research, and a few other houses were pumping funds into the project in hopes of results long term. Ian quickly threw together a budget, and once Sammy woke up he was able to get a list of potential expenses. A large portion of the drive was taken up with a conversation with Samuel. Back when they had first designed the observatory they had high hopes of expanding. He knew exactly where he wanted to build, and the commandos were more than willing to discuss the best locations for roadblocks, security cordons, and the like. A few messages to Ella and Sammy got him approvals on the initial design. By the time they made it to Denver, Ian had a purchase request for a few prefab modular buildings, all Shilvati made and to be installed by Shilvati workers for security purposes, some landing pads, and repairs for the parking lot. Of course, all the purchases were going through his family. It was a little bit of nepotism and a lot of trusting their ability to make sure everything was done right. Base security was accommodating, and soon enough Ian's little posse made it to the hospital. Samuel grabbed a cardboard box of things for Stace and they began the jog through the snow to the front entrance. An armored military transport was parked by the doors, and as they walked around it Samuel froze, dropping the box with a crash. There were two Marines leading out a large, thick-set Shil woman in handcuffs. Just ahead of them was another Shilvati, this one slender and much younger, with a long dark coat and her white hair pulled back into a ponytail. "You?" The woman in handcuffs struggled to free herself, spitting words in Samuel's direction. "This is all your fault." Samuel started shaking, and Ian instinctively pulled the small human behind him, interposing himself between the two. The commandos did the same thing for both of the males, and soon there was a wall of purple flesh protecting Sam from this hissing, screaming woman. The younger Shilvati in the coat casually drew a pistol from under her arm, flipped it in her hand, and brought the grip down across the other woman's face, breaking her nose with a crunch. When the woman kept struggling, she did it again. After that, the bulky woman hung limp between the two Marines. A gesture from the one in the coat and they carried forward/dragged their prisoner into the vehicle. Samuel Forsyth, painter, I take it. The woman in the coat made no attempt to get past the two commandos and Ieng, but she smiled pleasantly as she reholstered the still bloody pistol. I am Inspector Jelsai Chelzer. Sorry you had to see that. It's okay. Ieng could feel the little human calm down, the shaking subsiding with a few deep breaths. Thank you. The interior agent shrugged. I should thank you. I had been sort of hoping she would try something. It seemed then that she noticed Ieng. And you are. The two commandos parted and Ieng nervously extended a hand for a fist bump. Ieng Elbruck. It's a pleasure to meet you. Inspector Chelzer seemed deep in thought for a moment, then smiled wide. You're one of the ones that found Stace. Yes, No real need to correct her. We came for a visit. That's wonderful. She seemed genuinely pleased with the turn of events. I was told he had a bit of an accident yesterday, but I haven't been able to meet with him. Too busy dealing with that piece of shit. She gestured with one thumb back at the armored vehicle with a sigh. Which, unfortunately, I have to get back to. Tell Stace I said hi. We will. Oh, and here. The inspector pulled out her pad and flicked a finger. Sam and Ieng's pads both beeped in response. There's my personal contact info. If something is going on with Stace, or you peered at Samuel, run into any more trouble, just let me know. Okay. Yes, The wheelchair rolled smoothly down the hall, a tired Eustace Grant managing to hold himself up as Eskel pushed their way towards Stace's room. His patient was alert and seemed in remarkably good spirits. Compared to the day before, it felt like a miracle. A miracle Eskel had run himself ragged to implement. Once Stace was out, Eskel had realized that the human's care needed some major adjustments. He spent a few hours doing research, then, with trembling hands, made a call to Jelsai Chelzer, interior agent and noble. Eskel apologized profusely and explained the situation along with what he wanted to do to help. Jelsai immediately agreed and gave Eskel a line of credit to use and permission to throw House Chelzer's name into the mix if needed. She didn't have to tell him what would happen if he abused either of those options. The implication was clear. The next step was finding Stace a new therapist who could work with him immediately. They had to be good and, just as importantly, they had to be human. Stace had too much strangeness in his life. Eskel found a retired military psychiatrist who specialized in combat injuries and post-traumatic stress disorder. He apologized profusely for calling so late, then explained Stace's situation and asked how much it would cost for her to come out of retirement and take the next flight to Denver. She must have been intrigued by the prospect because she asked for far less than he was expecting. Eskel had made other calls, other arrangements, but he would have to run them by Stace. No need to overdo it, especially so soon after that last little incident. The whole world seemed to freeze as Eskel wheeled Stace into his room. They weren't alone. Waiting in the chair was perhaps the prettiest man the Helcom had ever seen. The Shilvati's face was round, his lips full between two small tusks, and his hair perfectly coiffed. His skin was clear and a pale lilac, clothing perfect. The chain connecting a cuff on his pointed ear to a ring on his tusk caught the light with every small movement of his head. Even the slight bags under his eyes that spoke of not enough sleep were beautiful. Stace. The spell was broken as the man threw himself across the room to engulf the human in a friendly hug. Followed by a friendly kiss. A friendly kiss that looked like it had a surprisingly large amount of tongue. Skill let out a polite cough, then glanced to either side. Nobody else seemed to be around, thankfully. The man flushed a bright blue as he let go of Stace, stammering out an apology. He stood straight, turned, and made space so Skill could finish pushing the chair into the room and close the door. It's not. I mean it's. The man floundered as he tried to figure out what to say, only calming down when Stace started laughing so hard it turned into a coughing fit. Ieng, this is my nurse Skill. Skill, this is my shit. My man friend Ieng. Man friend? Did Stace mean what he thought it meant? Boyfriend Ieng said in a whisper. It's okay, Skill is. Please don't say it, Stace. Please. Is good people. Won't tell. Really? Really? Your secret is safe with me. Thank you, Stace. Skill felt tension he didn't know he had leave his shoulders. Where is Sam? Thought he was visiting too. Ieng frowned. We crossed paths with that Celia woman on our way in. Sam dropped his box of goodies and broke the screen he was going to give you. He's out buying something new. And Celia. Inspector Chills a pistol whipped the shit out of her right in front of us. Ha! Stace grinned. That's the woman you shot, right? Stace nodded in reply. She's not a good person. The Helcom was really out of his element. He pulled the wheelchair next to the bed and started flattening it so he could transfer Stace. Let me help. Ieng grabbed Stace's hips and the pair were easily able to move the human onto the bed. Skill plugged the tubes and wires into the port in Stace's side and pushed some buttons on the screen. Don't, mmmmhhh. Stace's eyes closed for a moment as he groaned, then lay still. What did you do to him? Ieng looked panicked and angry, fists in tight balls. Skill turned towards the pretty man and raised his hands placatingly. I'm okay. Stace's voice was a little thing, quiet and slightly slurred. Was afraid. He would make me sleep again. Looks like while Stace was in therapy the doctor made some medication adjustments. I can't talk details without Ella Helium's approval. Can't Stace approve it? Sadly, no. It has to be Ella. She. I got a card. Skill turned to see Stace still lying there, eyes closed, only he had his left hand sticking straight up, holding his ID card in the air, lanyard tight against his neck. His voice was still slurred, if anything it was worse. Says Ella's in courage. Ieng grabbed the card out of Stace's hand and, after a moment, Skill reached past to push the human's arm back down. This was ridiculous. How was Stace supposed to improve if he spent all his time outside of therapy stoned out of his mind? Can you keep an eye on him for a bit? I am going to find someone. This doesn't look right. Skill wasn't an expert on human dosing, but the numbers looked off somehow. Too regular, not tuned for Stace's actual body mass like they should be. Making a snap decision, he turned off the dispenser and unhooked Stace. After a moment's thought and out of an abundance of caution, Skill unplugged the dispenser from the wall and pulled its battery. If something was wrong with it he didn't want it getting used on accident. Ieng nodded with a relieved smile and it was only then that Skill realized how tense Stace's condition was making the other man. A quick pat on Stace's shoulder and Skill was off like a shot. Here he comes. Stace blearily opened his eyes. The bright nimbus of light slowly faded until he could make out a ring of faces. Ieng, in stylish sunglasses, looking terrified. Skill, looking almost as scared. Joe, looking upset and as angry as Stace had ever seen a person. A human, mid-30s, pale skin. Sam. The human grinned. We have to quit meeting like this. Aang huffed. How come he gets the first hello? A small sniff came from the man and Stace realized that those sunglasses were hiding tears. What happened? Someone almost killed you. Every head turned and looked at Sam. What? He should know. We don't know that for sure, Skell said, though Stace could hear the doubt in his voice. It could have been an accident, Jeoe said. And when I find out who caused it, heads will roll. There was a small bleep and Samuel turned to look at something. Stace tried to sit up and Skell, noticing his attempt, adjusted the bed so he could see the room better. Stace was hooked up to a medication dispenser, but the cover was missing, a bunch of wires exposed. Samuel had another one partially disassembled on the small table. His omnipod was attached to it by a small bundle of wires and tools were strewn all over the place. Are those leather working tools? Stace's brain was still foggy, but for some reason it seemed very important that he knew what sort of tools they were. They were supposed to be a gift. Aang chimed in with another sniff. Something to do while you sat in bed. Every tool's a hammer and every knife's a screwdriver, Sam said absently. Ah, here we are. I was right. Someone pushed a firmware update through the network that removed all the safeties and changed the settings to cause a multiple drug overdose. It would have kept ramping up, dumping every drug in the dispenser until Stace flatlined. Nurse Jeoe pulled out her omnipod and ran out of the room, shouting, something. Why me? That's a good question. Samuel sat and thought about it for a minute, then his eyes widened in panic. It might not just be you. He looked at his partially disassembled omnipod, then up at Aang. Call Ellora, tell her to go into full lockdown. Aang nodded and stepped into the hallway. Stace's mind was still a little foggy, but the burst of adrenaline was helping bring everything into focus. We need to leave. Skell and Sam both turned to Stace. It's dangerous to keep me here. Next time might get people hurt. You mean people who aren't you? When I got back to the room, Aang was doing chest compressions. I think you died for a minute or two. Skell sounded stunned, like the words were just falling out of his mouth. I need to make a call. Stace watched as the Helcom's hands tapped the omnipod. He looked so nervous, delicate fingers trembling over the screen. Yes, No, I'm so. I need to. Someone tried to kill Stace. That seemed to get through to whoever was on the other end. All right, I will. Skell pushed a button and sat the omnipod down on Stace's lap, the most central location in the room. Stace, are you there? Yes, Jill. I feel. Not good. Head's fuzzy. What exactly happened? Jill Seychells's voice was incredibly cold. It promised death. Someone reprogrammed Stace's medication dispenser to give him a fatal overdose. Of everything? Who is that? Samuel, How would you know what? Actually, that's not important right now. How did they do it? Through the network. These machines are all attached to the hospital mainframe. How hard would that be to do? From outside the hospital? Incredibly difficult. From inside the network it would be almost trivial. Give me a minute. Stace tried to follow the conversation, but he still didn't feel quite right. He coughed into his hand, then checked it. Little red flecks peppered his palm. It might not be a big deal, but, no. Stace had been making too many bad decisions lately. He gestured at Skell, then coughed again. The Helcom's eyes went wide. I'm going to go steal a medical scanner. Watch him, okay. Aang stepped back into the room as Skell left at a sprint. About 20 seconds later, the public address system crackled to life. Attention, this building is under lockdown. Do not attempt to leave the premises. Doing so will result in a military response. Okay, that's taken care of. What was Estelle saying? Jill's eyes sounded strained, like she was forcing herself to be calm. Stace, he's bad. Coughing blood. Estelle is grabbing some equipment. Iang's voice was quavering, on the verge of panic. Stace waved at the Shilvati and managed to grab one of his soft, lilac hands. I will be okay. Don't worry. Stace tried to hold in another racking cough, but he couldn't quite manage. The taste of copper filled his mouth. I'm not going anywhere. Shit. Shit shit shit. I'm in orbit waiting to go to phase, so I can't come to help. Hang on, Stace. I'm going to send someone to help. You'll like her, she's big but she's nice. Okay, Jill. Thank you. Stace made a point of rolling his eyes for Iang's benefit, but his friend didn't seem to perk up. Are those two Marines still with you? Yes. Stace lifted his head, startled. He hadn't noticed the two women standing in the back of the room, their rifles leaning behind them against the wall. What are your names? Full names. The two Marines actually looked scared. Larry Ulza, Pelli Tara, Larry, Pelli, you have 4 males to protect. If any of them come to any harm, so much as a hair on their heads are misplaced, I will have you both spayed. Understood? Yes. Now they looked terrified. Dr. Rico was not going to let a patient die. That independent nurse, Estelle, was a pain in the ass, but he seemed to know what he was about. When the doctor found him draped in medical equipment, dragging a scanner behind him, all he had to do was shout pulmonary embolism and multiple drug overdose, and Rico was right behind the little guy. The hospital was in lockdown, somebody had hacked the medication dispensers, so they had to unhook every patient and put them on bottles like primitives, and now this. Make way. Rico plowed into the surprisingly crowded room. Estelle got the scanner plugged in as Rico swung it over Stace's chest. What's going on? The voice came out of an omnipod on Stace's lap, but Rico ignored it. Too much work to do. Medal of Commendation for you, Estelle, you were right. Pulmonary embolism, but it's a small one. Some anticoagulants should manage it. He'll be all right. She turned to the coverless dispenser, cables and hoses running to her patient, and stopped. What the fuck? Unplug that thing. It's all right, it's not on the network. A tiny human male was leaned over another disassembled dispenser. It was in storage and I blew out its network chip before we hooked it up. Can't be hacked. Stace started seizing then, his body having tiny convulsions. The doctor punched the buttons on the dispenser, changed some of the dosing, tried to counter the various compounds surging through the human's body. The shaking subsided gradually. What is going on? The voice on the phone was shouting, the speaker's tinny at that volume. Shut up. Rico leaned over and hit the end call button, then moved the scanner to continue looking for problem areas. It took her a moment to realize that everyone in the room was staring at her. What? So how many times is that now? 4, I think. I wonder if that's a record. Larry and Pelry were screwed, and they knew it. That interior agent seemed attached to the dying human, and it wouldn't matter that they weren't the reason he kept flatlining. The pair was charged with taking care of him, and if he died the interior wouldn't care that it was complications from overdosing on 20 different drugs at once. The only person who was more screwed than they were was the doctor. Hanging up on Inspector Chelser had not been a good idea, and ever since that cute Helcom nurse explained what she had done, the woman had been drenched in sweat. Every time her patient's heart stopped she seemed more frantic. Still, whatever humans were, they were certainly tenacious. After half an hour of his heart stopping and popping back again and again, he was still hanging in there. It was like the sea of souls just refused to have him. A Marine stepped into the crowded room, then gestured to the pair. She was huge, tall and wrapped in cord muscle, and her armor was an older design that almost looked painted onto her giant frame. The only symbol on it was a O. Oh shit. My name is Keller Chelser. I will be taking over here. What do you have to report? The pair of assault commandos looked at each other. Keller Chelser. Retired Death's Head Commando. Married into a noble house after single-handedly stopping an assassination plot. Books, literal books, had been written about this woman's life. In person, she was even more terrifying. Among commandos and high-speed operators, she was a legend. The same unit insignia was on the handful of masked women behind her. Larry stammered. Report, Marine. Now. Pellery jumped to the rescue. Someone hacked the human's medication dispenser to kill him. The doctor is trying her best, but I don't. Keller cut her off with a wave of her massive hand. How do you know about the hack? Samuel waved. I'm working on it. Keller smirked. Funny seeing you here, Sam. I had you pegged for data warfare the moment I met you. Sure, whatever. Stace wasn't the only target. One sweep of a massive arm and Larry and Pellery found themselves out in the hallway, surrounded by Death's Head commandos. Keller had simply displaced the pair to make room for herself. At least they could still overhear the conversation. This firmware update went to every medical scanner in the building, but it was set to only activate if it was hooked to either Celia Merrick or Eustace Grant. If I can get to the hospital servers, I might be able to get more information. Keller seemed to move too fast for her size. She was suddenly gone, the small human tucked under one arm, moving at a sprint down the hallway. 3 of the terrifying trained killers followed her, the other 2 staying in place. Well, at least if they survived this, they wouldn't have to buy their own drinks for a while. Just meeting Keller and her team would be the highlight of their careers. Military hospitals were all the same. Keller had been to many of them over the years, and this one was no different. Samuel weighed pretty much nothing and was polite enough to not struggle as Keller used her bulk as a battering ram, knocking down nurses, patients, carts, pretty much anything in her wake. It didn't take more than a few minutes to get to the IT office. She slowed down just enough to let go of Sam without hurting him, then put on the speed, tucked her head down and shouldered the metal security door at a dead run. Pain shot through her shoulder, a tearing agony as the ball dislocated from the socket, but the door stayed up. It was a good thing she wasn't trying to knock it down. A member of her squad examined the door with a nod. Keller had managed to significantly warp the door, and that was all the masked woman needed. She slid a thin fiber cutter into the new gap between the door and frame and, in less than 30 seconds, the door fell to the floor, hinges neatly severed. Her team slid into the IT room professionally and silently, clearing it as Samuel got to his feet and ran by the stationary giant of a woman. Keller took a moment to ram her arm into the door frame, popping it back into place with a quiet grunt of agony before following into the room. The woman with the cutter had just finished cutting a lock off a toolbox and Samuel was ripping through it like a maniac, grabbing screwdrivers, some sort of soldering tool she barely recognized, and anything else that looked useful. Then the tiny human gave the room a quick glance, found his target, and got to work. In less than 30 seconds, he had the server he wanted open and exposed. He hadn't bothered to unscrew anything, he just used a screwdriver as a leverage optimizer and ripped the thing apart. Then the real work started. Sometimes, rarely in your life, you get a chance to see a true virtuoso at work. It doesn't matter what they are doing, who they are, When you have that opportunity, you watch. You just might learn something. What Keller was learning was that Samuel either had no idea what he was doing, or he was quite possibly a mad genius. Less than 3 minutes after they were in the room, Samuel calmly remarked, "The intrusion happened on a data line in room 143. Whatever it is, it's still there." With a quick nod, all three commandos sprinted out of the door, leaving Keller alone with the human. Finally, when he seemed to have calmed down, holding his soldering pen inside the ruined piece of technology and checking his pad on occasion, she had to ask, "What, exactly, are you doing right now?" "Bypassing the security subsystem so I can download all of the server logs." "How?" "This little security board is a pain in the ass. If I remove it, it corrupts everything. If I destroy it, it corrupts everything. It's smart, for what it is, and has a ridiculously high clock speed. It's a fast thinker and good at counter-intrusion. However, it has a major flaw that I am currently exploiting the living hell out of. And that flaw is, it's self-throttling. If it gets hot, it slows down. That stops it from burning itself out. Normally, it never has to slow itself down more than 10% or so, but the genius who designed this didn't engineer a proper lower limit. If I short a couple pins on the board, I can keep heating it and it will keep slowing down. Eventually, it gets so hot that it burns out the throttling controller. Then I can remove the heat and it will stay where it is. Gone from as smart as Stace to as dumb as your sister-in-law seems to think he is." Well, that was confusing. Jelsai always spoke well of Stace. He was like a project for her, an injured and damaged human she had taken a liking to and wanted to keep safe. Part of the reason Keller was here was because of that. "What do you mean, seems to think? And how do you know Jelsai is my sister-in-law?" Samuel gave her a combination head tilt and eyebrow raise. "Seriously? If you took Jelsai, put him on stilts, and gave him tits and a tusk job, they would look like twins. Definitely siblings with the same mom. Since you're married to Jelsai, that really narrows down the options." Keller took a moment to picture it, then grinned. Maybe she should see if she could get him to do it. It would be a perfect way to tease Jelsai. But, still, she had to stay on track. And Stace. The man is capital S smart. At least as smart as I am, maybe as smart as Sammy. If he had decided to go into research instead of teaching, well, whatever. The guy has a master's degree in biology, a bachelor's in chemistry, and another degree in education. I looked into him, had a friend at his college dig through his records. The man is terrifyingly bright. Samuel's face contorted in anger. And Jelsai treats him like a fucking pet. She said he could barely talk, only spoke simple sentences, barely seemed to know what is going on. You've seen the condition he's in? Keller was getting slightly angry, but she tamped it down. No need to come to Jelsai's defense. Especially if there was something to this. You speak English, right? Some, yes. I would hardly say I'm fluent. How long have you been studying it? Keller thought it over. About 2 Earth years, off and on. Samuel's eyes still held anger, but the rest of his face curled into a smug grin. Stace didn't even know the Shilvati existed until 4 months ago. And he's spent a lot of that time unconscious. How much English could you speak in 4 months? Oh. Oh shit. Keller thought back to Jelsai's comments about the man. She was describing actual conversations. Sure, halting and slow, but he speaks Shil slowly because he doesn't know much vocabulary. He seems like he doesn't know what's going on because people talk too fast and he's in an alien hospital on a planet that's completely different from the one he left. He doesn't know because nobody is telling him. And instead your sister is treating him like It's disgusting. Did you know she got him put on medical stewardship? No hearings, no consultations, no discussion with him, just bam, the guy's basically property for the foreseeable future. What if someone did that to you? Keller considered it. She knew exactly what would happen if someone did that to her. That was the weird thing, though. Well, why didn't Stace tell her? Fuck if I know for sure, but if I had to guess, at first he was too overwhelmed by aliens being on Earth to know what had been done to him, and then, once he did know, he knew that he'd have to piss off a goddamn noble interior agent to get it fixed. Who knows how Jelsai would take her toy talking back to her. Getting too independent for his own good. Samuel looked like he was going to spit. His whole body was shaking with rage. Your family has done a lot for us. Jelsai too. We would likely all be dead without your help. But that doesn't give you the right to just take ownership of other people's lives. An uncomfortable silence formed. Keller honestly didn't know what to say. She wasn't noble-born, she knew exactly what Samuel meant. She had seen what nobles, what the interior was capable of. She also knew Jelsai wasn't like that. Was she? The way she had described her new project certainly didn't make Stace sound like a person. More like an old exo someone saved from the scrapyard and was trying to rebuild. Keller was interrupted by a beep on Samuel's pad. His whole demeanor seemed to shift as his attention moved back to the tablet. Looks like your friends found who or what was on the network. It just dropped connection. $10 says it's an omnipod. And I'm not just saying that because the network says it was one. He went back to typing on his pad, the device connected all over the inside of the server within wires. It was like a parasite digging itself into tissue, or the roots of a plant burrowing through the ground. What are you doing now? Copying all the server traffic logs and anything that looks interesting? We can go over it later and piece together exactly what happened. The three commandos walked in, one holding an omnipod with a short length of cable dangling from it. Samuel held up a hand and deftly caught it as it was tossed to him, then in one smooth motion smashed a corner of the device on the ground. A screwdriver went in the crack and with a twist it was in two pieces. What are you? Samuel ripped out something boxy and threw it across the room, where it proceeded to spatter and smoke. Battery was wired to short out if you disconnected the pad from the network. Would have cooked the whole thing and wouldn't look like anything to security. How did you know that? I didn't, but it's always better to assume the worst. What would really suck if they stored everything in volatile memory, so if you yanked the battery all the data would be gone? He took a look inside the smashed and disassembled pad. Nah, we're good. Fucking amateur hour over here. Samuel disconnected his omnipod and used one of his pilfered screwdrivers to reassemble it, leaving the network of wires all over the place. The partially smashed one went into one pocket, his personal pad in another. Okay, we're done here. Let's check on Stace. As they were leaving, Keller took a moment to grab Samuel's shoulder. His whole body flinched and locked up. He went from composed to terrified in an instant. She released his shoulder and he seemed to recover slightly. Whatever they ended up doing to Celia wouldn't be harsh enough. She should die by millimeters for hurting this poor guy. Sorry. I'm going to talk to Jelsai. About Stace. If she fucked things up, she will need to take responsibility and fix it. I'll make sure she does. Samuel smiled at her, but it was so clear. He didn't believe a word of it. Thanks. Ian stood outside the surgical theatre, waiting. He was calm. Everyone in the hospital was in a state of panic, but inside he found a piece of soothing clarity. Stace had been awake as they rolled him into the operating room. Clear-eyed, conscious. He had seen Ian and smiled, had even managed a wink. If there was one thing I knew about Stace, it was that the man was impossibly stubborn. That one wink had been as good as a promise. He was going to survive. He simply wouldn't let himself die. A small nudge drew his attention and Ian pulled out of his introspection to see that Helcom nurse offering him a cup. A meaty, hot smell filled his nose as he mechanically took a sip. Some sort of soup or broth. A comforting taste. He'll be okay. Askel didn't sound sure. Like he was trying to convince himself. I know. Askel nodded his grey head. Physically, at least, he's probably going to come out of this better than he has been in decades. What do you mean? He had some serious tissue damage even before that overdose. The man was just plain worn out. It was going to take a long time for it to heal, but considering how poorly he was handling the new eye, it seemed safer to let it take that time. All those drugs did a number on him and sort of forced our hand. Now Ian was worried. He felt wetness in his eyes again, a hitch in his voice. Forced it how? He's getting a new heart, liver, kidneys, lungs. A few other things. All synthetic, no time to grow him clone tissue even if he could afford it. Once he has time to get used to them, he's probably going to feel 20 years younger. He's going to need a lot of help adjusting. I found him a good therapist, but it won't be enough. Stace is going to need real support. I will do what I can, but he's going to need his family. Ian shook his head. He doesn't have any family. He has you. You and Ella. Ian couldn't hold his small smile in. You're right about that. He checked his Omnipod, then looked back at the Helcom. About how long do you think the surgery will take? Askel shrugged. At least 20 more hours, I'd say. It's a lot of work. Do you mind waiting here for a little while? I need to make some calls. 10 days later. Sunlight was streaming in through the window, illuminating a rectangle of the floor and warming Eustace Grant's face. He awoke with a yawn, then had a moment of panic. He had no idea where he was or how long he had been out. It felt like a long time. He was lying in a regular bed. No hospital gurney. There was one of those medical dispenser gizmos, but it seemed different than the one at the hospital. It was larger, and instead of a parade of hoses and wires he was attached by, it almost looked like a thick cable. Like a power cord. He took a moment to center himself. It's okay. It's just a different style medical dispenser. Don't think about it. Don't think about the huge scar you can see in between the buttons on your shirt. Focus on something else. Look around. The room itself was wholly unfamiliar, but comfortable. Wood-paneled walls that matched a hardwood floor. The rug in the center of the room was purple with an embroidered paisley design that he immediately decided he liked. Very cozy. The only thing he could see that looked modern was the high ceiling. The whole thing appeared to be a light of some kind, emanating a muted and soft yellow glow. There were a few pieces of furniture. That was his dresser from the cabin. And his table. The chairs were new, but in a rustic design that matched well. Stace took a minute to consider. The room was bigger than the cabin, but if the bed was here and the dresser was there, then that would mean, yep. A little faux fireplace complete with fake logs sat under the large window, pretending to burn exactly where the fireplace should be. It was cute. He could hear footsteps coming, multiple people at a dead run. It would be his family, he knew. They probably had an alarm to let them know when he woke up. Cautiously, he flexed his body, rolled his shoulders. Everything felt incredibly sore, but there was some strength there. Stability. Things had changed, but he was alive. Ian and Ella burst in and suddenly Stace was wrapped in warm, familiar arms. Familiar scents. familiar happy and crying faces. He was home. End of chapter. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss any episode and do all the other YouTube stuff. Visit and support the author, and I'll see you next time. If you didn't enjoy, comment on what I can do better. And as usual, have a wonderful day.